So I just want to say, women, words, and wisdom. Every year, that's the name of this event. And when we think of women as the source, right? And words as the expression, and wisdom as the impact. So today we're going to hear from a beautiful source with an amazing story that has used your story and your experience to create a platform that is needed for so many women out there, even those who are not victims of sexual assault, even the women who just know someone who has walked that road, or if you don't, but you can just imagine what that is like. So thank you. Thank you first for sharing your story, being brave enough to sing it from the mountains and from space. So thank you.
Thank you.
So let's kind of start with that initial journey. I mean, you were at Harvard, Ivy League, but what occurred to you kind of forced you into a place maybe that you hadn't obviously anticipated you would be in. Tell us about that story and what caused you to become an activist.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. Everyone here has been so kind. I love your fashion. I've loved getting to meet you. Teresa, you are such a pillar of this community. Yes, wow, congratulations. And forgive me for forgetting, is it Shirley? Congratulations, 30 years. Alma, what a great job you have done in putting this together, and just really to every board member and every person here, the greatest thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you for caring about this work. Thank you for choosing to spend your time to be here. You could be doing anything. I still remember what it felt like walking out of the hospital. I had spent like 6 hours for my rape kit procedure, and I had no idea what it would entail. I had cared about these issues before, but really, truly didn't understand what it meant to be a survivor, and also how broken I felt the criminal justice system was until I became a survivor. And that moment when I was walking out of the hospital, I spent all night there, so the sun, was rising. I remember being handed a taxi voucher just to go back to my dorm room where it happened, and I had never more fully understood the definition of lonely. But now when I look out at this crowd, I am not lonely anymore. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for supporting groups like this. I wanted to be an astronaut. That was my dream. I researched astrophysics, and that comes from, my parents. My mom is a boat refugee from Vietnam. I know there's some Vietnamese people in the house, so it was so lovely to meet you.
Shout out.
She and her family learned celestial navigation in order to find their way to freedom. And my dad is an aerospace engineer, so really, that legacy was what inspired me to study the stars. But unfortunately, during the last semester at Harvard, I was sexually assaulted. And I remember, again, just not understanding how prevalent it was. I remember going and walking into my local area rape crisis center, and it was filled. And when I found out that at that time, before my activism, before our organizing, that rape kits could be untested, destroyed before the statute of limitations, and that there was no way to extend it, that there wasn't standard operating procedures for it, I felt completely betrayed. For me, the rape wasn't the worst thing that happened. It was having been brought up with these sacrosanct values of what it means to have equality under the law, that if survivors were to go and seek help, go to the hospital, do the things we're supposed to do, that we would be met with help, and to understand that there were these obscure rules that perhaps, maybe not maliciously intended, but really impacted our path to justice. That made me just fueled with this idea that I had a choice. I could accept this injustice or rewrite the law, and one of these things is a lot better than the other, so I rewrote it.
Either or, right? Yeah, I just want to revisit what you said about feeling lonely. because I would hope, I have an 11-year-old daughter, that she would have somewhere to go, that she would be greeted by some of the women in this room, if ever, something like that horrible would ever happen to her. So when did it kind of turn around when you felt like you had people and you felt like somebody might lift you up so that you could use this platform this way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer that in two ways. The first one is I decided to speak up. My first really action of activism was when I decided to email everyone I knew. I mean, I really was shameless about it. I put my professors, my entire classmates, everyone. And this was before Me Too. It still is stigmatic today to talk about it. Back then, of course, it was very stigmatic. And I had astronaut mentors, very well-meaning, who said, "What are you doing? If you want to continue your astronaut candidacy, there are choices that will either help you or will make it harder for you to find your way to space." And I really understand from their point of view what it means to be part of the first class of women who were accepted into the astronaut corps, how difficult the sacrifices they had to make. I completely understand that decision. And there was a part of me that weighed the cost-benefit analysis of staying silent or speaking my truth. And I went to Leland Melvin. Leland was in the NFL and then became an astronaut, so steal all the dreams. And I went to Leland and I told him about my predicament. And he said to me, "Amanda," now it's public, but then it was private. He said, "Amanda, I'm also a survivor." And here's this man who really is the embodiment of what so many people think are what boys want to grow up to be, And he says, "Go fight for our rights, and space will be there. It'll be there long after you're gone. So when you're ready, come back, and I'll be there to help you." And he was my first phone call when I got assigned. He was my first phone call when I was told that I would fly to space.
An unlikely place.
Yes.
That you had no idea that
Yes.
this would be someone that would offer that support to you.
I didn't answer your question, though, so let me answer
That was a great story, though.
Thank you.
I like that one better.
So I sent out this email, and I really didn't know how people would respond. But so many people responded. So many people said, "Oh, hey, I'm also a survivor." Or people said, how can I help? I'm a teacher. I'm a nurse. I am a quant. And it is because of people coming together just from their backgrounds wanting to help that ultimately resulted in us writing, drafting this piece of legislation and being able to organize and pass it unanimously through Congress.
Wow. And the people who did respond, had they maybe kept it inside too? Like, did they feel empowered now to tell their story?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that hope is a renewable resource. And when somebody finds out that they have a similar story to someone, there's this ability for us to just be human, connect on that level and open up a little, and find that in our shared humanity, in fact, that's what can change the world.
We can't stay quiet. We owe it to each other to have that connection. So let's talk about the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights. You make it sound so easy. But, I mean, gosh, I can only imagine what that journey was like for you. So talk about the wins, and then maybe what was the most challenging part of that legislative journey.
Yeah. Wow. I remember the first time that I talked to a politician, and it was my first time sharing my story. And at first I didn't. I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick to the facts and the figures and like why it is legally precedent and like, the economic impact of and people, this is going to date me, people would not look up from their BlackBerries. So, and I realized, I do need to put a human face on this issue, on these numbers, on this bill draft. And I said, I am a rape survivor. My kit could be destroyed. I am fighting to preserve my evidence along with 25 million other people. And as soon as I said, they would look up from their phones, they would connect. And there were those who were honest. I would say that there were politicians who said, oh, I sympathize with what happened to you, but this isn't going to help me get reelected. And I was like, wow, your honesty is refreshing. Wow, that's not what I expected. And I went home and I cried because, I had feelings. And I remember just being like, God, I just need one person to tell me that they love me. And the next morning, as a pathological optimist, because that's little required in activism, I got up and I went back to the United States Senate. And in my Uber ride, I met, this man, the driver. He was very stoic, kind of intimidating, and didn't really talk to me, but he saw I was going to the Senate. So he asked me why. And I told him. I was like, you know what? I have to practice telling my story, yes. So I'm going to practice it. I told him. And this once intimidating man just started crying. Tears welled out of his eyes, just crying. And he said, my daughter was also raped. And what you went through is very similar to what she went through. And when he stopped the car, he said, can I shake your hand? Thank you so much for fighting for her. Has anyone told you that they love you today? I love you. And I will never forget that, Dad.
I think I just want to kind of emphasize that telling your story, like you never know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And so it sounds, second time, I'm sure it was maybe more than that, but telling your story allows someone else to tell their story.
Yeah.
And to motivate you. So I bet you walked in there like, bam, I'm here!
Yeah, absolutely. What I left with and has really stayed with me is that when we speak up for justice, for what we think is right, it's not only about the people we're fighting for, it's their loved ones. It is a whole just weaving a thread, a tapestry of justice. And so, yes, in fact, when the senators were like, I don't know, I'm like, well, it's not only for 25 million. It's actually for their dads, for their moms, for everyone.
We're talking billions.
Yes.
I mean, it's everyone that's affected
Absolutely.
by this. I love your message. It's no dream is too wild. So I love that because I think we can use that no matter where we are, no matter what words are coming out of our mouth. But how do you cultivate that mindset in your own life amidst some of the challenges, the doubts, the imposter syndrome, I don't think you have that anymore, but whatever you're dealing with, how do you always keep that in the front of your mind? No dream is too wild.
Well, I'll start with the person who taught me about bravery, which is my mom. So my mom was younger than me. She was in her 20s when she decided to escape Vietnam on a boat. And she says that she went into death to seek life. They waited until it was a stormy night so that the guards would be less likely to patrol and would be inside. And she swam a quarter mile out to where the boat was already. It was her brother, my uncle, and my cousin who had learned the celestial navigation. They were the captain of the boat. And as they were speeding out into international waters, they heard the machine guns spray around them. They were caught. And now, a lot of refugees carry gold because that's something that transfers values across borders. And at the same time that their fishing boat, their small boat was going, they saw a bigger boat that was also escaping. So the guards said, y'all stay here while we go get them, and we'll come back for you. And my mom turned to my uncle, and she said, it's do or die. We must try. And so they sped out, and they made it to international waters. But their boat was sinking because it was a tidal wave storm. And she says that these waves were like skyscrapers, that in her boat, she thought for some reason every time they would go up, they would go down, but if they had collapsed, they would just all die. And in that moment, a bigger boat came and decided to rescue them. But because that boat was so much bigger, they couldn't just drag this sinking boat. So in this tidal wave storm, they threw over a single rope. And everyone, all those refugees had to climb that rope from the small fishing boat to the big boat. And she says, the only way that I got through this is not by thinking about the entire length of the rope, but just by thinking about the next pull and the next and the next. And what that teaches me is that you don't have to have bravery and courage for the entire journey, just for the next step and the next and the next. And so, when people ask me about bravery and courage and how I took on the United States government, I often think, well, if she went through that, then what's emailing a senator? Yeah, I can do it too.
You can do that, yeah. Wow. It reminds me of natural childbirth.
Yeah.
I was like, 10 minutes. Just get through 10 minutes. I want to just ask this, but I kind of think you said it at least one way, but I'm sure you have many. So let's talk about allies who have not experienced sexual violence. But it was like that dad in that Uber ride, or taxi ride at the time, who gave you the strength to walk in there differently than you had the day before. So how can we all play a meaningful role in prevention and really show up supporting, even though sometimes it's a little scary because you're worried, am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to tear this person down even farther? Am I going to ask the wrong question? How can we be there in a real way?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think my answer is something you just said, which is showing up. So the first law I worked on was actually the state law, Massachusetts, even though the federal law passed before. But I remember, so I was in DC, and the Massachusetts State House, the next day was the last day of the legislative session. So if the bill did not pass, we'd have to start all over again. It was do or die. And I was sitting in the airport just waiting to see whether or not the speaker would bring it up for a vote, because at that point it was not on the agenda. And I got a call, and it was, the policy advisor. She was like, "Oh, man, I'm so sorry. He's not bringing it up for a vote." And I also went to the bathroom and cried because I have feelings. And I remember texting my friends, and they said, "Amanda, just show up at the state. Just show up. Show up with people. And stand in front of the door of the floor, make every single one of them have to walk past your face." And I was the last person on that plane. And the next morning we got there, and even our lead sponsors, of course they're champions, but they're like, "Hey, we're so sorry, next legislative cycle, we'll work on it." And I asked people to call in. I asked them to call the speaker to bring it up for a vote, because I was confident if he brought it up, it would pass. And I went, and my friends, allies, came with me, and we went door to door asking people. And at the end of the day, the speaker relented. I went into his room and I saw how annoyed the waiting staff was, because all the phones were ringing, and I was like, "How is this working?" And at the end of the day, he brought it up for a vote, and it passed unanimously. And we couldn't have done that without all those allies showing up. And so, of course, that's on, this macro level, but on an interpersonal level, just holding space for someone, not questioning them, but rather just listening to them, letting them know that you're there for them. All of these things are so monumental in the healing process. And I'm so grateful for every single person who had done that for me.
And for our, survivors here in the room, what a brave moment for you all to be here. And, there are some here that may not be ready to share their story, and they may just be here for that organic support or that natural support that's just happening by the people in this room, because you're amazing. But what would you say to them to help them find their voice? I know you said, you just grab the rope one pull at a time. Is that your advice, or would you say a little more?
Yeah, I want to recognize and say that I do what I do so that every survivor can make their own choice about whether or not to share. And it's totally okay if you choose not to share. And the reason I say that is because ultimately I believe that joy is the most radical form of rebellion. And so that means healing. That means that perhaps for so many of us, we live in a world where it's not a vacuum. We might face retaliation for speaking up and for sharing. And so whatever that cost benefit is, I trust that you know what that is. And perhaps in your healing journey, if that cost is too high, then that's okay. That's for you to decide. My hope for you is that you make your way through. You know that you're supported and believed, and that you find that joy.
I love that. Yeah, find that joy. So what does give you hope in this fight against sexual violence right now in the space we're in? So much has changed, you know. I mean, you mentioned Me Too. There's so much discussion now. What is that hope for you?
What gives me hope is Teresa, is Shirley, Alma, you all, because it is the fabric of us holding on to one another, saying, no, we see you and you matter. Your stories matter. This work matters. You know, it's the drumbeat of waking up every day and continuing to keep marching on, even if the cameras are off, even when we don't get those accolades. You know, I learned about these sheroes that are going to be honored later. How incredible are they? And also how incredible are all of the people and the staff of this center. So, you know, even when the news feels like a garbage dumpster fire, I am nonpartisan.
I only read it.
You know, I still have so much hope because over the past 11 years that RISE has existed, we've continued to organize and pass laws, and we just passed our 114th law last week.
All right, I want everyone to look at her picture. Yes, I think the coolest thing there is that she's so cute. And then also that you now have an astronaut suit. I mean, you have lived your dream. I mean, it was amazing. I don't know if you all saw the group you were on, but when you all landed, everyone was like, oh my gosh, I've never experienced anything like it. To see the Earth the way that you saw it from that height. What was that moment like for you to kind of come full circle? What you wanted at Harvard, there was a pause for you to do all this amazing work, and now to live that dream.
Yeah, I am so deeply, deeply grateful for the ability to realize that literally no dream is impossible, no matter the odds, no matter the obstacles. That even something as wild as going to space can be possible. You know, all astronauts ring a bell before boarding the spaceship, and it comes from the nautical tradition of ringing aboard sailors into the ship. And so when I was ringing my bell, I thought of the sailors in my life, my uncle, my cousin. I thought about my mom, of course. She swam so I can fly. And you cross the ocean, I could touch the sky, and I thought about her, the girl I was before I was raped. I thought about her dreams, and that I made a promise to her that we would go fight for our rights, but that I would still protect her joy, even if it was as wild as getting to space. And, you know, we all have a zero-G indicator, which is something that floats when we hit microgravity. And I brought this note that I had made, that promise to myself, never, never, never give up. And that was what I told to, you know, everyone. That was the very nice, neat one. But there was another zero-G indicator that I did not know I would bring. It was my hospital band from the night. I had kept it all those years. And you know, when I kept it, I never knew why. It was so painful. And before, we count the days up to a launch as, you know, L minus 3 days, L minus 2 days. And so L minus 5 days before launch. You know, I was getting ready to go to the astronaut village, and I saw it and I was like, I don't know if I'll take it. And I just said, okay, you know what, I'll just take it. I'll decide whether or not I'll do it later. And during training, our trainers were like, okay, whatever you bring with you on your pockets, you better bring, we got to train with it. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I will bring it. It was so painful. I wanted to, being an astronaut for me was supposed to be this moment where I would like break out of this survivor label. And it was a literal label. It's a literal hospital label. It labels me for the worst day of my life. And I thought to myself, do I really want to bring this trauma with me on the day that I'm supposed to break out on this moment, this trauma? And I just brought it with me. And then the morning of, I was like, okay, maybe I'll just put it in my suit, and I won't necessarily bring it out. I'll just have it with me. I didn't know if I would bring it. And when I was in space, I had to do my experiments. I had my speech to Vietnam. I had all these things, and then the 1 minute buzzer went off. If you are not in your seat, you will die. So that buzzer, it went off, and at that moment, I knew why I had kept that wristband all those years. I knew that moment. I brought it out, and I showed that girl the promise that I showed her the world that she had changed. And so I'm so grateful. And that moment of justice and also of being able to keep that joy, to realize that dream despite everything, that is something I wish for every survivor.
Let me just ask a final question, and then we'll come to you all to ask some questions. So please think of them and make sure they're as good as mine. So think hard. This whole you said stories, and you told some really beautiful ones. So I do wonder though, what's the voice in your head? Because you're listening, every time you tell the story when you need to tell the story, and then it's like, boom, you get something that pushes you forward. In that moment, you knew to bring it. You did not bring it. So what's the voice? Who is it? what is it saying to you? Because obviously it's speaking well, and it's sending you in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's the survivor in me. And what I realized in that moment, holding that wristband falling at over 3,000 miles per hour back at Earth, is that I don't need to compartmentalize who I am. It is okay for me to be a survivor and also to be an astronaut, that we are multitudes, and that this is a part of me, and I embrace all parts of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. All right. Wow. I wrote down what your mom said because I just thought it. She said, we came on boats and now we're on spaceships.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. All right, do we have any audience questions? I know I put a lot of pressure on you out there, but we'd love to hear from you. I think this is a time when people are kind of reflecting on what their dreams are. So as people are thinking about what they want to say, if anything, no pressure. But what is next for you?
Well, I can't wait to fly again. Yeah. I'm just looking at that picture, which I'm so grateful, which was captured. It's unbelievable.
That's the moment when you got back on Earth.
That's
came
right.
Out. Yeah.
That's right. I remember.
You guys were crazy. It was so fun to watch it. I was watching it live as it was happening, and I'm like, oh my, I want to go.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It was. You talked about imposter syndrome, and I really want all women to hear this when I say this. When I was in that rocket and I was blasting off, I had the opposite of imposter syndrome. I was like, I was meant to be here. I love this, and all the training that I had. I went through, it's called Vomit Comet, which is where they put you in a plane, a jet, and you fly these parabolas in order to get acclimated to zero-G or microgravity. And as the name has it, it makes people nauseous. And it helps train us for the moments when we're going through ascent and descent. But I remember I was like, there were other people who were like, oh, I almost blacked out. And, I was like, no, I loved it. It was great. I remember I was like, put me back on.
Born for this.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm so grateful to have been able to also have that experience.
Yeah, I mean, you think about in Harvard, I mean, you were a senior. That's the one thing that really resonated with me also is that you were almost done.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
so that dream was right there.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on that, because that's absolutely true. You know, for me, my mom, she was not able to graduate college because Saigon fell. And so, you know, to have gotten so close and to have that sign that never, never, never give up, I wrote that directly after the hospital, and I put it onto my laptop. I taped it there, and I looked at it every day because I was determined to not let this rapist be the reason I didn't graduate. And then I looked at it every day when I was fighting for my rights in Congress, in the United Nations, and I looked at it floating over Earth.
Do you ever, I guess I do wonder, you know, as you've come so far and you've done all those dreams, you're living them, you're fighting for others, you're writing books, I mean, you're doing all the things. Do you ever become that college student again in that space, and how do you move past that?
Wow, well, writing that book brought me right back to that, you know. I mean, I had to unearth the Pandora's box of all of these primary documents and feel what I was feeling at that moment as I went through the writing process of my memoir. For those who might not know, my memoir is half in, you know, traditional memoir and half in magical realism. So I go into my memory and I meet the 5-year-old, 15-year-old, and 22-year-old versions of myself. 22 is the age in which I was assaulted. And the 5-year-old gets sick, and we have to save 5, which is why the book is called Saving 5. And in order to save 5, we have to go through these 5 realms of grief, the 5 stages. We have to answer, we meet the realm keeper, which is a stage of grief, and we have to answer a question about that realm. And when we answer that question by talking about a memory of ours, that stage of grief gives us a gift in order to proceed all the way to acceptance. And for me, revisiting what it meant to be back, you know, at 22, back at 15, back at 5, was difficult. You know, I wrote it as, it was a very meta process of writing it, because I was writing about a healing journey while, you know, the process of writing was healing. And I told this to my therapist, and she said, Amanda, that's so great of you to write about a process that you haven't started yet. I was like, oh, this is why I pay you.
I want it more. What else? I was like, tell me more. I mean, what a beautiful way. I have not read the book, but I will. I mean, what a beautiful way to take people through that journey of healing.
Yeah, I wanted people to be able to imagine their own healing journey, you know. I also, at every realm, I chose a place that was beautiful on Earth, because if you wanted to heal, why would not heal in places that are beautiful? And so these places are like national parks across the United States, because I love being in nature, and that's what heals me.
You've been to Zion?
Oh my God, yes.
I was just here last year. It's amazing.
Yes, yeah. The first realm is Antelope Canyon. Yeah, it's the canyons that are there, and the acceptance is White Sands National Park.
Get the book. Get the book. That sounds amazing. Let me just kind of circle back, because you did say more than 100 bills. Can you tell me, I mean, you can't tell us all, we don't have time, but is there, other than the one we mentioned, the sexual assault rights bill, but is there anything else that really stands out? And then what is next that you would like to see change legislatively?
The United Nations resolution took a really long time. It took me 7 months to pass in the United States Congress, which is a record, but it took me 6 years to pass in the United Nations. And that's because not everywhere is a democracy. And so the relationship that many of these member states have to civil society is very different. You know, whereas in the United States, no matter, you know, the political belief you have, all public servants are there to serve the public. You know, they are there in the capacity of listening to their constituents and wanting to, in their whatever way they believe, make this country into a fairer, safer, little bit place. That is not true of the United Nations. And so to convince the world, and it really was the world because every, member state has a vote, it was such a fascinating process to have to go through. And then in terms of what's next, we still pass these rights state by state, even if we pass on the federal level. That's what the majority of those laws are. But we also are working on a treaty. So after the resolution in the General Assembly, which outlines a standard of justice by which countries have agreed to treat access to justice for survivors of sexual violence, the next step is universal jurisdiction. And I know that's a very high bar to meet, but we are fighting for it. Other crimes are, considered under universal jurisdiction, and what we're fighting for is sexual violence to be under that.
We'll be here when that happens. We'll be here for that. All right, thank you for your patience. Oh, I see a mic in the crowd. Please.
Hi, my name's Carolyn, and did you know the person?
Yes, I did know the person.
Sorry, it's a sort of a 3 questions in one. Did you see that person after?
I did not.
You did not?
I did not. I want to tell you the story, and I wrote it in my memoir, but my lawyers were like, no, you cannot say it. So I'm looking at this camera right here. It's so great. What I will say is that I am proud of myself because I told him, I said, I'm never talking to you again. And in the vaguest terms, I will say that what he had texted me, one of the most pivotal moments in my activism was finding out that it was a script and that other survivors got word for word the same script.
Oh my.
And when we found that out together, I was like, this has got to change. This has got to change.
My last question is, I'm sorry, is there a point in your therapy, in that journey, where something distinct changed for you? Where you either convinced yourself that you could do hard things and get through it, and could you share that with us?
Yeah, and thank you so much for asking these questions. The truth is that the second time when I tried to find out where my rape kit was, so in Massachusetts, before my law passed there, at 6 months, rape kits would be destroyed untested unless you extended it. So the first time, and there was no real way to extend it. So the first time I went to the police, and they said, we don't know where your kit is. And I was like, do I, in fact, still have my justice? I might provide some context here, which is that, I wanted to be an astronaut, and that my many mentors said, going through an active trial is not going to help you be an astronaut. And that's why I chose to not immediately go through with the case at first. I was like, there's a statute of limitations. I can achieve my dreams first and then come back to it. That's what it's there for. That's why the 6-month rule hit, because I chose not to immediately. I was like, I can come back, and unfortunately the 6-month thing happened. And so I went, and it was truly so traumatic for me to not know where it was. And then I did successfully track down I found the forensic lab where it was, extended it. And then again, 6 months later, I lived my life by date of rape, it really was like a timer. It was like a Saw game. And the second time, the police were like, we don't see it. It might have been destroyed. I was like, are you kidding me? All of this trauma for what? And I remember I was rock bottom. It was rock bottom for me. And I remember thinking, what's the point? Do we even matter? you know, and I remember it was such a, if you've seen the movie Mad Max Furiosa, where she like screams and it's like just nuts, that's how I felt. It was just, I was like, do we even matter? And in that moment, it was, I will not let him win. I will change. It was like hell or high water. I will change this. I don't care if I die changing it. And it was rage. It was rage for me. And I will say that rage fueled me so much, but after a while, that fuel runs out, and what was left was hope. And that hope is from seeing the community respond. Some people respond to that email, seeing, you know, these public servants say, yeah, I will help you. Seeing that unanimous vote. But it did start off from a place of pain. And I will say that for those of us who may realize it, pain is power. Our pain is so powerful. You know, it is energy. And if we're able to direct it, it is rocket fuel.
From rage to hope to joy.
It's true.
To joy.
It's
Yeah.
true, to that moment. That's like really all of it in one picture.
If you just want to say the last words, really, because I appreciate that question, because I think everyone's journey is so different. You know, is it fear? Is it rage? Is it regret? Is it blame? You know, all the things that would drive you to tell your story or not. So I don't know if you have any last words just for anyone who's kind of walking through any of those emotions right now, trying to decide what to do.
You know, I remember it was, this space flight was the most covered space flight in history, over Apollo. It was 4 million people who watched it live, and it's because social media didn't exist during the Apollo era. You know, it was so intense, and I remember just the crew really being together and talking about like what it meant to them. It was so stressful, to be honest, because I had to do so many experiments, and then the speech in Vietnamese, and then, you know, like the promise, I kept myself pulling it up. Like it was a lot of things to do in space, and then strap myself down so I didn't die. You know, as I was going through it, after we landed, and then the next day I debriefed the launch crew and the engineering team, and then one of my friends who's an organizer, is also a survivor, she said, Amanda, do you get to choose the day that you launch? I said, what? No, we do not. That is not how rocket launches work. She said, did you know that you launched April 14th, which is the day that your rape kit was supposed to be destroyed? And I was like, wow. She was like, you were meant to be there. That was your moment of justice. And I just want to tell anyone who is going through it, in their own healing journey, that nothing is impossible. Impossible is just an opinion, and that no one is powerless when we come together, and no one is invisible when we demand to be seen. You know, and so thank you so much for seeing me today.
Thank you, Amanda. You're awesome. You're awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Oh, thank you.